Stop share. There we go. Okay.
Before we move on, did anyone see the image that came out this week of Uranus from James Webb?
Sure. Yeah, it was great.
And continuing on. Okay. So next up on the list, we're going to be talking about Edward Barnard. He is an American astronomer and one of the first really heavy photographic astronomers, which we'll see more about this. He was born slightly before the start of the American Civil War in Nashville, Tennessee, in 1857. His father died about 3 months before he was born, and he was raised primarily by his mother, along with one other brother, which I could not his other brother was kind of an enigma. There's not really much that I was able to find on him or about any of his immediate family relationships. But what was known is that the lack of having a father figure around the house contributed greatly to the family's poverty situation. They were constantly impoverished for most of Bernard's childhood and teenage years. And his mother was also had a variety of constant health issues, which weren't really detailed. They were just summarized as quote unquote health issues, which could have been anything from what I haven't seen. So this constantly put them in a really tight spot. What's also interesting here is there wasn't, despite growing up in Nashville, Tennessee, there isn't a lot of information showing how the American Civil War might have impacted his early childhood, considering that I think Nashville was one of the cities that was raised by Sherman or had several battles near it. So I was surprised not to find much about that event on his early life. But what is known is believed is that his first exposure to astronomy occurred when he was about 4 years old, where it is believed that he saw the Great Comet of 1861. And this was one of the several events that would contribute to him gaining a lifelong interest in astronomy. He was not schooled. He dropped out after 2 months of the Nashville's public school program, just couldn't stand it. And I believe also some other situations with his family contributed there. Despite that, at age 9, he took a job as a photographer assistant, hoping to help get a little bit more money to help out his family's poverty situation, with a man named John H. von Strovoen. I butchered that, but I apologize. Curiously, though, this isn't your normal type of photography job. He operated what's as a guider for what's known as the Jupiter solar camera. And I have a picture of that on the next slide. And so he was basically like how we commonly use in photography, another camera to keep track of stars so that we can make sure the telescope remains on target. That's basically what he did, except he did this for solar observations. And during his time on the job, he would also assembled a series of observational records that he used to discover on his own analemmas, which Doug is certainly familiar with, which is the shape. It's a figure 8 shape that is traced out by the sun as it moves across the sky. If you were to photograph or if you were to look at the sun at the same time of day, every day of the year. The next major event that contributed that astronomical event that really pushed him in his way was the partial solar eclipse of 1867, which passed directly through Nashville, which he saw at the age of 12. So here, on the next slide, I need to figure out how to turn off subtitles because that's distracting. There we go. Sorry about that. This is a picture of the Jupiter solar camera, which, as you can see, is quite big. It's kind of curious that something of this large existed in Nashville or was still left standing after the American Civil War, because this would have been 1866 when he started this job. So only 2 years at most after the Civil War. So it's kind of curious on that. So outside of after his stint at at the photography shop as a photographer's assistant, he was around 19 years old when he sought out astronomer Simon Newcomb when by chance the American Academy of Advancement of Science was meeting in Nashville that year. And he saw him out, was expressed, hey, I have this interest in astronomy. Is there anything that you would recommend? And Newcomb told him, go learn math, which with most of us, you can imagine, I don't want to go learn math. I want to look at things. And he came out of this meeting with Newcomb, by some accounts, very disappointed. Others said that he was enraged, and kind of viewing Newcomb as kind of like this paparazzi star from his point of view. But he didn't let that deter him. And shortly after that meeting with Newcomb, he went out and he bought his first telescope, which I think it was a right there. It was a 5-inch refractor, which he bought out of Pennsylvania, and coiningly referred to it as his quote unquote pet. Kind of a weird moniker to add on to a telescope, but I believe some of us kind of feel the same way about our own equipment. So during this time period, after he purchased this telescope, he discovered a variety of things, mostly comets. He was a very good comet hunter. His first one he found in 1881, but he never actually formally announced this particular comet discovery, so it didn't go recognized, I think, until like very late in his career. Fortunately for him, during this time, really a wealthy New York businessman named Hubert Harrington Warner announced an ongoing prize of $200 to every person to every discovery of a comet that was brought to him and was proven and validated by other astronomers, which in the 1880s is quite a lot of money. So there was some comments that suggested that Warner was actually kind of an early fan of Barnard, and this award was kind of set up specifically for him. Wasn't quite clear on how that might have been the case or how the two would have interacted before this, so I'm not quite sure about that side. But during this time period, over a span of 2 or 3 years, he would go on to discover 15 comets, and he would use the money to build a house for his wife in Nashville in 1881. Sorry, his wife, who he married in 1881. We won't go too much into external family relationships here. So there wasn't a lot. It was, from what I gathered, it was a normal marriage for that time period. And they had no children. So after this, messing around with his own telescope, finding a slew of comets to his name, his abilities of finding these drew the attention of a lot of local astronomers within Nashville. And they, out of the goodness of their hearts, which was actually really cool, is the amateur astronomers in Nashville funded him a scholarship so that he could attend Vanderbilt University. And the university, seeing all of this to him, also contributed him a job at the Vanderbilt Observatory, which he used to, him and his family actually lived on the observatory grounds him and his wife lived on the observatory grounds in the observatory warm house during this time period. And he would go on to take various courses in math and language the whole time. He kind of continuing the theme of not really liking school whatsoever. He never finished the degree. But despite his accomplishments, well, despite him dropping out of the degree, Vanderbilt would go on to award him what remains today its only honorary degree, which is actually really cool, considering it's like a 200-year-old university at this point. So after Vanderbilt, oh, no, sorry. So during his several years at Vanderbilt, I think he, 83 to 87 was when he officially left. So over a 4-year period, he discovered a couple of prominent objects. There's a lot more in here. Just some of the ones that we might recognize. Was he discovered what's now named after him, Barnard's galaxy, which I don't have a picture of handy. He also discovered the California Nebula. Excuse me. And he independently rediscovered what's known as, I'm going to butcher this because it's German, Getzenschein, which is a similar cousin of zodiacal light. It's similar in appearance, but there's the physical aspects of how it gets generated are different between the two. But we won't go over that here. The light was originally first noted, like 1678 or somewhere around that period, by a sailing astronomer, whose name escapes me because I forgot to put it on the slides. And over on the right, there's a quick picture showing what it looks like. It's this bright band in the sky here over the ESO Observatory in the Atacama Desert. So, finishing up his time at Vanderbilt, he was reached out by the soon-to-be director of the Lick Observatory, Edward Holden, about a job. The observatory actually hadn't been built yet. He offered him a job anyway, and it was a salary of about $1,200 per year, which I quite well for that particular time period. And Barnard and his kind of really impulsive of him and kind of shocked that he got away with this. Basically packed up his whole family and moved to the observatory site before it was finished. So he left behind everything in Nashville and just said, "We're going to California." And kind of hurt him in the long run because since the observatory hadn't been built yet, he didn't have a job, and he struggled over the next couple of months to pay the bills, so to say, and would go on to spend a lot of his time just offering his services to copy legal documents in order to just buy food and other things for him and his wife. But once the observatory was finished, he thought, hey, I'm going to get to use some really cool equipment, blah, blah, blah. But he kind of got into several spats with Ed Holden very early on. And Holden was kind of spiteful and kept Barnard from looking at all using the more powerful 36-inch telescope that was built in the observatory. And it basically was forced to use the 12 for a lot of his early work here. This would last for, I think, 3 or 4 years before he finally got on the 36-inch. But it didn't stop him. Using the 12-inch telescope, he did a lot. He photographed. Photographed the first comet to be found using solely by photography. This wasn't a visual comet, but photographic, and he discovered this in 1892. He also discovered Jupiter's moon Alethea during that same year, which would be the last of Jupiter's moons that was discovered without the aid of a camera or other instrument. Excuse me. But in addition to that, he also, and I wasn't quite sure where this eclipse was because I forgot to look it up on the map, was simultaneously operating multiple cameras and photographed was this is the second photograph of a solar eclipse. There was one earlier than this that was recorded off of Africa, I believe. And this picture of the solar eclipse actually earned him a second honorary degree from the University of the Pacific over in California. So no verbal scolding, and people just gave him 2 free PhDs. So after that, after getting over his spats with Ed Holden and finally getting some time on the 36-inch, about a year later, he was offered a job at the Yerkes Observatory in Chicago, which is where he would spend the rest of his time before he eventually succumbed to various illnesses. He originally went there as a tester for the observatory's 40-inch telescope, but ended up, they just invited him on and he stayed. What was also really cool is that Yerkes would end up building a telescope solely for his use, which is a 10-inch what's known as the 10-inch Bruce telescope, and this would be dedicated solely for Barnard to use with photographic astronomy. So this led to a lot of really cool things, having this dedicated wide field telescope, which was necessary for photography because your auxiliary cameras are not very sensitive at all during this time. He contributed many images of Mars that were used to refute Schiaparelli's Martian Canal hypothesis, which much to the dismay of James Lowell later in the 1900s, because as for those who may not be aware, James Lowell built Lowell Observatory here in Flagstaff, Arizona, specifically to find these moon canals, Martian canals, and they were mostly figments of someone's imagination. He also, using the Bruce telescope and in collaboration with another astronomer in Germany named Max Wolf, photographed what became the first images of the Milky Way's central bulge and galactic disk. And I did not, unfortunately, have a year for when that was published. Some other discoveries that he also would do photographics. Forget the term for it first. Measurements of the proper motion of what's now known as Barnard star. This is a small red dwarf star. It's one of the closest stars to Earth. But what sets it apart is that it has, with respect to Earth, this is kind of difficult to phrase, it is moving across the sky incredibly quickly. So you can actually see this whole, if you went out to the star every night over a 3-year period, you could see the star just move. I think it's like 0.2 degrees or something like that. No, 0.2 arc minutes.
I thought it was 10 arc seconds a year.
Thank you. Which is about 0.2. Never mind. My math is hurting. I need to stop thinking about math. In addition to that, he also photographed Halley's Comet, and was the last person to actually see the comet. He actually followed the comet about a year before it became visible. This was when the comet was still out near Jupiter, just kind of picking up. And he followed it all the way in and out of the solar system, and was officially the last person that would see the comet until it would return in 1985, excuse me. He would also go on to assemble a pretty big catalog of about 349 other nebulas with the Bruce telescope. Some more prominent examples of these are Barnard's Loop, which is this giant stream of gas that's hanging off of the big side of Orion. The Horsehead Nebula is also part of this catalog. It's known as Barnard 33. So there are a lot of objects that are here. Most of these would be very much photographic objects, not necessarily things that you would be able to see easily in a visual telescope. But this catalog was published by the university after his death. Which leads us to the end of this presentation of exactly how he died. So he was diagnosed with diabetes in 1914 and which lacking blood treatments nowadays was very difficult for him to deal with. His wife Rhoda would die of a stroke about 7 years later. During this time, she died. No, and sorry, losing my notes. And by some accounts, the loss of his wife devastated him. He kind of changed a lot after this, even though he wouldn't very long. He became very internal. But undeterred by his wife's death, he would go on to do a couple more key observations. His last scientific observation was an occultation of Venus by the moon, which he observed in January of 1923. And he would then go on and die from several complications with heart failure and diabetes at his home in 1923, where he is now buried in back in Nashville. And that's it. Those are some references. Any questions?
Yeah, would you go back to your first slide?
Sure. Let me. This one?
I don't know.
Or do you want the
very first one? Your really first slide.
This is my first slide.
No, that's your first slide. Okay. Okay. Never mind.
What's
Nothing.
okay.
Just
were you thinking you saw a typo or something?
Yeah, I thought I saw a typo. I thought I saw the name spelled Bernard. And I was saying, oh, wait a minute, I thought it was BAR. Okay, never mind.
That might be in there somewhere on accident. That did kind of flip flop his names a couple of times, but thanks.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
So Connors, Pete, I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
So in your readings, and I know you mentioned a little bit with respect to Mr. Barnard, do you think it was a general, allergic reaction to education, or was he just, he didn't see it as necessary to accomplish what he wanted to in astronomy, and he'd just as soon continue on with his observations or the work he was doing?
I think he just didn't have the patience for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I always read about him, is he was very thin on patience. And also he had a, what today I think you'd call the opposite of an inferiority complex. He thought he didn't need it.
Yeah, because it's kind of surprising. I mean, basically, he had almost a 55, 60-year career in astronomy.
Now, one thing I will say, Connor, I don't know this for sure. Those 2 honorary degrees that he got, one from Vanderbilt and one from University Pacific, I'm not sure those were PhDs. I don't know if they were doctorates or if they were just honorary bachelor's degrees.
Honorary degrees are typically given as honorary doctorates. They typically don't. Most universities don't give out honorary bachelors. At least according to the Wikipedia article.
Was that true 100 years ago?
That, from what I briefly read, seems to be a general truth.
Okay.
It was considered a badge of honor to be given.
Okay, I just didn't know.
Yeah, it's a question. I was kind of confused about that too, because I was like, "What are honorary?" Because I've heard the term before, but I just didn't know. Basically, they give you a free PhD because you made a lot of special accomplishments.
Okay.
For example, Bill Nye has an honorary PhD and an honorary engineering PhD, I believe. Anything else?
No, good job. Thank you.
There's kind of also one thing I was, if you're kind of interested to learn more about the Jupiter solar camera, you're not going to get a lot of help with Google, but mostly because Jupiter and solar are very common terms, and so they don't turn up anything like
that. I'm looking at the camera, and it looks like it's just a big projection thing. Like It's got the lens is up at the top left. And there's that big sunshade around it that puts the whole telescope in shadow. And then I'm guessing it projects the image down into that box on the right.
That would be my assumption as well. But I was kind of curious that they had an instrument this big in Nashville, and I hadn't heard about it before. But it was
Nashville was not destroyed by the Civil War. It was occupied by Union troops for most of the Civil War, and it was not part of Sherman's march.
okay. That I was getting some things wrong.
Yeah, I think for the
It's
most
been
part,
a lot of the years that I've had history.
the most part, the Civil War was rather benign to Nashville. I mean, there were certainly some other towns in the region that took a lot more, but I don't, Nashville wasn't necessarily a strategic location.
Okay, I learned something new.
It's an interesting looking projection box. That's really strange.
Right? And I was disappointed that I couldn't really find anything about this except for presentations in which Barnard came up. So I couldn't find anything about why the telescope was built or what it was being used for other than to observe the sun.
Oh, you don't know if it was associated with the university?
I couldn't find anything about that.
Okay.
It seemed to have been a privately owned telescope because it was
Oh, wow.
because Barnard was looking as a photograph assistant out of a corner shop, and apparently they were doing stuff with this telescope, from what I was able to see. But I couldn't find it. You can't find anything about this because the Jupiter, Solar, and Telescope. When you throw them into Google, they throw you to Jupiter or James Webb stuff, which is not at all helpful. So.
Oh wait, there's a guy inside the scope. Yes, there is.
Oh, you talk about that Louvre, oh yeah.
Up above the guy who's sitting down, there is someone's up there in that top slot.
Does he have like a top hat on? He does have a top hat on. Jeez.
Yeah. So that probably could change it where it's a giant projection box, and they probably had it a piece of paper or something like that in the back to draw observations on. Or
well, that's what I'm thinking is the projection is probably way down at the bottom right. But these are places where these slits in the side are perhaps places where you could go in and look at the projection. You want to be in a dark, and you can probably close those doors. Yeah, you can. Those are doors that you can close. So you can go inside the enclosure, it looks like, and then close all the doors so that you're in a pitch black environment, which gives you the ideal projection on that bottom wall. What a unique gadget.
Good catch, Steve.
So.
Really unique.
Right? And I was really upset I couldn't find more about this. So. Let me double check some things in the chat. Okay, nope, so things we've already gone over. Okay. So, and with that, that is it for tonight. Thank you, everybody. I do hope you, as a reminder, do go check out the bulletin. Let me know if you're interested in the solar filter workshop. Still actually looking for people that are interested, and I'm surprised I haven't gotten anybody yet.
It's early.
It is, but I need to go out and buy more of the materials.
Yeah, you probably won't get a lot of responses until like July. That's when people will start thinking about it. They'll start saying, oh yeah,